Go ahead and get started. Folks could take their seats. If you wouldn't mind coming closer, we're just going to try to make this as open and informal as possible. And so with everybody spread out to the wings, it hurts that a little bit. So if you don't mind, otherwise not a big deal. Thank you. I'm Peter Walk. I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Natural Resources. Thank you all for coming. It's been a few months since we've been down to talk about where things are, and we wanted to come down and provide an update. We're going to start with the water lines on the west side from the two engineering firms, and then we'll have a brief discussion about where we are in settlement negotiations, followed by some updates from Bennington College, and then some more on work that we're doing around as part of the remediation effort. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to the two engineering firms. I don't know who Drew Strassen's going first.
How about we go Jason?
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Jason Dolmich. I'm with MSK Engineering. We're the engineers for the Bennington water system side of the project. So just as a brief update, work in most areas are nearing completion. On schedule. Most areas are expected to be complete by October 31st. There are work along Route 67 will be the outlier. That's going to continue into November. The houses in most areas are largely connected with the exception of 67 and Murphy Road, with remaining to be connected. Traffic disruption is going to be generally at a minimum at this point, as most paving is going to be complete or has been completed or will be completed in the coming weeks. And that is it for our side. So we were scheduled to be complete by October 31st, and with the exception of one single contract along Route 67, we're about there. So I'll hand it over to Craig now.
Hello, my name is Craig Jewett. I'm with Otter Engineering, and I'm the engineer for the North Bennington portion of the project. The project is substantially complete. All users to be connected have been connected. All POET systems associated with those homes have been removed. And the project is finishing up a handful of punch list items and some additional work for the VPI School for Girls related to a fire service. But we anticipate punch list items should be complete by the end of this week, and the extra service for the VPI School for Girls will be sometime towards the end of the month. So hopefully by the 1st of November, we will actually be done and out of town, but everyone is connected, and the project is considered substantially complete at this point.
Great, thanks. I should say if folks have questions, we're gonna try to wait to the end just because they'll be, that way we can consolidate some of the questions and get through the presentations. Again, I just wanted to provide a brief update as to where we are in settlement negotiations. I'm not here tonight to tell you we have a complete deal, but I am excited to say that as they did on the west side, Saint-Gobain is willing to pay for the final engineering design on the east side so that we can continue with the negotiations. I'm cautiously optimistic that we're moving in the right direction, and that we will be able to come to agreement. We all know that this is the best and fastest way to get the work done as quickly as possible. And so I am happy to be able to say that tonight. That is, in my mind, significant progress and represents the same path that we were on the west side and their willingness to stay at the table until we get this done. And with that, I will hand it off to that. That's all I could say at this point. I'll take questions at the end, but I'll hand it off to Bennington College for an update.
Good evening. My name is Janet Foley. I teach chemistry at Bennington College, and if you've been to other meetings, you know that myself and the geologist Tim Schrader and our anthropologist David Bond have been working with the community and with the help of NSF funding and to look at water concentrations and to also deal with some of the questions in the community that may not, that don't necessarily deal directly with the health aspect of cleaning up your water. So I want to take a little time to update with some of the information we have about our most recent water studies, as well as some of the data that we have about soil. One of our students is here, Michael, and he's going to also talk about some of the soil data. We're really trying to involve a lot of the students in these research projects, as well as going out into the community and collecting water and so forth. So one of the things that we're able to do, because we're a university and or we're a college and we're not a state department, is we're able to think about questions that people have that are interesting to us in terms of helping us think about what really is going on with how the water is moving, or how does PFOA move through the soil and so forth. So some of the questions that have come up in meetings that we have been at have dealt with some of those things, and in terms of, if my water's been tested, how do I know if it's going to change? Or, how do I know that water coming out of the faucet is really PFOA free? So I'm going to talk about some of our information about that. Okay, so we picked three different wells that were pretty contaminated in three different regions, and that's what this slide is showing. And to really go take a sample from the faucet and be able to assure people that yes, the carbon filters seem to be doing the job. There is non-detect PFOA coming out of the faucet, even though the concentrations in the wells were particularly high. Some interesting things about those data, if you can give me the next slide. In looking at changes, with the question of how do I know if my concentration is going to go up or down, and so we looked at a lot of the information that we have, because we have retested places a couple of times, and what we found is that some go up and some go down, and there's not really a very clear way to look at it. But the next slide will show you some of that information. And you can see here that the blue dots are wells that have decreased from the initial amount. The red dots indicate ones that have increased. And the difference is not tremendously great. But one of the things we also found, if you give me the next slide, is that the change, what changes has very little to do with the initial concentration. So, this leads us to think about, okay, what's different about the water that's recharging these wells? And there's a couple of anomalous points there, but by and large, there's not a lot of change. Okay. One of the other points that we've collected a lot more data on are water samples from springs, natural wetlands, and streams, and particularly looking to the east, because if you look at Performance Plastics in Hoosick Falls and where the ChemFab plant was, the east was very interesting to us, because that would be the recipient of the dominant wind pattern. And you can see in this slide, the green and the red are, and you're probably familiar with these corrective areas 1 and 2, and to the right, you can see that that there's a lot of concentrations of water that are much higher than ones that are either more north or more south, indicating that there's something going on in that wind pattern that's coming from the in the direction from the northwest to the east. So this is some of the water data. Okay, next. This is more water data, and this is pretty interesting because you can see that there's a wide variety of concentrations. This is in the Bennington area and sort of the line from ChemFab to the landfill. And one of the things that we have noticed in a number of areas is you'll have wells that are non-detect very close to wells that are quite high. And in this slide, if you look at that black circle, there's a cluster of blue ones that are non-detect. And that really got us thinking about, all right, why would we have that cluster of non-detect in between the place where there's much higher concentrations? And Michael's going to talk about that a little bit because we tried to explore that idea to get some more information about the water system.
Hi, my name is Michael Hetzelberger. As Janet said, I'm a senior at Bennington College working on some of this research. If you could actually go back one slide. So this is an interesting question of you have clean wells within 100 yards of contaminated wells. So a question we're trying to grapple with some of the data we have is what changes between those wells that are right next to each other that can affect that. And what I'm looking at right now is some water chemistry data, trying to see if there's different water coming out of these wells, different sources of water possibly. So next slide. And what we've been finding generally, and I'm trying to confirm currently, is that those clean wells happen to be coming out of deeper water. They've been drilled deeper and are getting their water from very deep fractures in the bedrock. And that deeper water is actually chemically different from the shallower water. And the general pattern is that very deep water seems to be very old water, and the shallower water that's contaminated is much younger, probably fell in this general vicinity as rain and infiltrated in, and that deeper water possibly could be from very far off and traveled here or from a very long time ago and has been in the ground for a very long time. And we're trying to confirm that basically this idea we have this layer of old water that's clean beneath this layer of much younger water that seems to be contaminated in the area. And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you define deeper and shallower?
With depth, I can't really do that. Probably around 200, 300 feet-ish.
Is deeper?
Deeper, yeah, past that you're gonna get your deeper water. It's really difficult because when you drill a well, if you drill it 300 feet, that doesn't mean you're getting water from 300 feet. There could be fractures that are a lot shallower than that you're actually getting your water from. So it's kind of difficult to say where the water is coming from just from the depth of your well. But we are getting definitely chemically distinct bodies of water that seem to correlate with depth. Yeah, sure.
So say you have a deep well that has nothing in it, would that mean that over time that PFOA would go deeper and those wells would end up with PFOA?
That's a very good question, and it's...
Could you repeat the question?
The question was, is it possible if you have a deep well that's uncontaminated, could it become contaminated in the future from that PFOA leaching further down? It's a good question. It is very possible. The scale of that happening, I'm not sure whether it could happen in a few decades or thousands of years. That's another question. What I could tell you is that the contaminated water, the younger, shallower water, is definitely more local, like probably falling as precipitation in this area and going into our aquifer. The deeper water that is clean is not precipitation water from around here. Any recent time, any modern precipitation, it's probably been migrating underground for 100+ years from very far away. So it's very possible that it won't be contaminated, but I couldn't really tell you with any accuracy right now.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, next slide. Okay, so most recently we've been trying to work on soil concentrations. Soil concentrations, as you probably know, are parts per billion, whereas we measure the drinking water in parts per trillion. And again, this is a similar view to what I showed you with the water, where you have Saint-Gobain and Hoosick Falls and ChemFab, and then the landfill in between there. And in this case, we also are looking at the dominant wind pattern, and are there differences in where the PFOA is landing in the soil and staying in the soil. And you can see here that in the areas right east of corrective area 1 and 2, the concentrations in the soil are somewhat higher than if you look at the ones very much above and below, they're much lower. That's consistent with our present hypothesis, is that a lot of that deposition there is airborne, and we'll show. I'll show some more of that when we look at the profile of what happens when the precipitation hits, or when the air hits Bald Mountain there. But this cluster of soil concentrations right outside that corrective area 2, I think, are pretty informative. Okay, next. Okay, so this is the profile of what you just saw in the previous slide, where you have the blue are water concentrations, and the dark colors are the soil concentrations as you go up Bald Mountain, and actually as you go further, and you can see that air patterns as you go around mountains, as you go around hills, become very different. And we've got various areas of parts per billion concentration in the soils, as well as parts per trillion in the water. And this really supports the idea that not only are you having contamination from the point source, but you have PFOA traveling through the air, adsorbed to aerosols and other things. Okay. Getting back to Bennington campus, we've drilled we've drilled 6 now, but 3 initially, monitoring wells. As you know, the Bennington College campus is like right next to ChemFab, and so you can see some interesting concentrations there in the soil. That as we drilled down, we took various samples, and there's some interesting differences. You have 1,600 ppt right next to 150 parts per trillion, and so again, that really makes us wonder about what is different about those wells, and that's a thing. That's a question that some of our students are also exploring. Okay. And these are students doing work, And they have been very much involved in working and drilling the wells and collecting the samples and really working with this idea to really try to understand how are we going to use this information to figure out what's going on in the soil, and how the water is moving in the area. Okay? This is our diagram for our hypothesis, if you will, whereas you have certainly point source of PFOA, right around the plant, what comes out of the smokestack and falls right near there. But we really feel that our data supports the idea that there has been airborne deposition. Now, we all know ChemFab's been closed for a long time, and so this airborne deposition is likely pretty old and is still a factor in the soil. But as PFOA would move through the air, or any of these PFs actually, and could possibly come down in rain or aerosols or small particulate matter in the air that PFOA could adsorb to and then fall in further away from the plant. Okay? So just to summarize what we've found in this particular soil study, it really seems that the overall dispersion of PFOA is a lot greater than was once thought. When we look at the whole area between Hoosick Falls and Bennington, it incorporates quite a few square miles. And we're still, we've got this idea, this defined idea of the plume. Since this started, we've all been trying to think about how far does this travel, and we're still working on that. But we have, a summary of what if you can give me the next slide. That we think that it's really covering this area. This again doesn't cover some of the sites in Petersburg and Pownell, but we feel that this represents kind of what we know based on the data that we have collected and that we've gotten from Vermont as well. Alexandra is going to talk about an experiment she's doing where we're really trying to figure out how PFOA adsorbs to soil.
Hi, so as Janet mentioned, I'm looking at how PFOA adsorbs to soil so we can get a better idea about how PFOA may leach through local soils. This is a diagram by Higgins and Luthi, just demonstrating some chemical compound related to PFOA and how it interacts with organic matter and water. Next slide. So here, I take 20 milligrams of clay and put it in 40 mils of deionized water in suspension and shake it up for a little bit. The reason why I do this, we mainly took it from this already published article and used it as our proof of procedure. If you could do the next slide. So this is our little shaker, just so things are more easily to grasp. I shake it up so the clays are evenly dispersed throughout the water solution, and then I spike each sample with a certain concentration of PFOA. In the latest batch that we sent to Williams College, we had 2 controls, 2 samples of 20 ppb spiked to 20 ppb, and 2 other samples spiked to 100 ppt. And we're interested to see, we know the concentration that we put in, and we want to see the concentration that comes out, and our conclusion or our hypothesis would be that the difference in the concentration is left over in the soil bits. So I have a picture of the sample so it's a little more clear. These are the 1 mil samples that we have that we sent to Williams College. They test this against PFOA with peak area curves, so they can quantitate how much PFOA or what is in the soil. So given this proof of procedure, I'm going to go collect some local soils and hopefully test the local soils and see how a PFOA leaches through our area.
Okay, I think there's one last. Okay, really want to thank you for your attention, and certainly, if you have any questions, we'd be glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Foley, to you and your students for all the work you're doing and answering many of the questions that we unfortunately are not able to answer. It's been a great teamwork effort, and we really appreciate it. So my name's Richard Speas, and along with John Schmelzer, my co-worker, we've been working on the Bennington issue for the last, since it began in 2016, and I'm just here to give you a brief update on what we're doing currently to answer the questions of what we're doing other than what we've already talked about. So something that wasn't on the agenda but goes very much into what Bennington College just reported is that our department did let out a grant to the University of Vermont, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, and they're in the process of collecting soil samples from all over the state of Vermont so we can get a better understanding of what contamination is statewide. We suspect, and from research that's been done, that there is low levels of these chemicals everywhere in the world at low concentrations. And as Bennington College has shown, higher concentrations where you have point sources that are emitting problems. So that's going to help us to answer the question of how are we going to deal with this statewide as a statewide problem. So just to let you know that we're doing that. In addition to that, here in Bennington, we've just begun our fall sampling. We do semi-annual sampling twice a year of all wells that are less than 20 parts per trillion so that we can make sure that no one goes above the drinking water standard. And if they do, we can then tell St. Gobain on the west side, and we will on the east side evaluate putting a treatment system on, getting people quickly getting them bottled water, and making sure that that contamination is addressed. So that work has begun, both on the west side. St. Gobain's contractor, CT Mail, has started that sampling, and once we get the results, we'll send them out. And here on the east side, under state contract with our contractor, Wade Heindel. That's right, John, right? Wade Heindel?
One of them, yes.
Yeah, the one, yeah. And then once we get those results, we'll send them out and keep people informed of what's going on if your well is less than 20 parts per trillion, which there are many, many wells that meet that condition. In addition to that, we have a POET, Operation and Maintenance Plan, and in that, there's, depending on the concentration that you have, you get sampled at a certain frequency. And since most of the POETs have been removed now from the west side of the site, obviously much of that sampling has ceased. There are still a few POETs left on that are being sampled, and those results will be sent out. But on the east side, almost everyone that has a POET has a concentration that gets them to a frequency of sampling of once a year. And we have lots of good data. We've presented it before, and I'll certainly speak with anyone after the meeting or whatever, that we know that these systems work, and because of the redundancy built into the system, that is protective of people's health, and that none of the PFOA gets through into your home based upon this sampling frequency. So that work is ongoing, and again, as we get the results, the contractor gets them, sends them to us, and then we get them out to the homeowner. One of the other things we're doing is part of the agreement over on the west side. Not only did we do water lines for the majority of the homes, but there were some homes on the periphery that for one of several reasons we could not connect to municipal water. There were about a dozen homes that were still above the drinking water standard for PFOA. And at those homes, as part of the agreement, we got St. Gobain to agree to investigate and where it made sense to drill replacement wells. And the idea, as we heard earlier, was that you would seal the surface of the surface aquifer and maybe the surface of the bedrock aquifer from recharging that well, and you would get that water from deeper down in the aquifer, where we already had indications that there were other wells that met that condition that were clean. And I'm happy to say that to date, it has been a little slow and struggling to get started, but we're rolling now, and in the last 3 weeks, they've drilled 3 of those wells. They're actually now starting the 4th well, probably today or tomorrow, and we've gotten results from 2 of the first 2 that were drilled. They're immediately sampled for the PFOA, and we get the results back, and we've gotten the results back for 2, and both of them that were once above 20 parts per trillion. I don't know the exact numbers, but somewhere between 20 and 100, I think, in most cases, are now clean. There was no PFOA in the first round of sampling. As part of the agreement, they leave the treatment system on the well for up to 2 years, or maybe longer than 2 years. They have to get 8 consecutive quarterly samples showing that those wells are clean, and at that point, we're going to believe that they're like all the other wells. The POETs will come off. We will then pick them up in whatever sampling frequency we're on at that time, whether it's semi-annually or annually, and then they'll continue to be sampled. Obviously, if for some reason they do go back up above 20, we'll evaluate putting a POET on and connecting them to municipal water if it makes sense, all the same things that we've been doing. And what we're very much hoping is that when and if we ever do settle with Saint-Gobain, that will bring many of those same ideas from that agreement over to this side. Obviously, it's a negotiation. We don't know exactly how it's going to go, but that's what everyone's pushing for. And I have one more. Oh, and then the last thing is pertaining to waterline design, which was mentioned. One of the things that's required by our regulations is that we evaluate what's the best remedy, not only for where that makes total sense for water lines, but for other types of remedies, that we evaluate it, come up with what the plan is, and from that then the contractor will draw up a corrective action plan. And at this point, we don't know whether it's going to be Saint-Gobain's contractor, Bar Engineering out of Minnesota, or if we'll use our contractor out of Maine, a company called AMEC. So that's still all part of the negotiation, but certainly that it's going to happen. That part of the process will certainly happen at one point very soon, and we're just trying to work our way through and figure out how that's going to work best. But that's all moving ahead. So I think that's all I have, and I'll hand it back over to Peter, and then we'll all be around to take questions.
Can we turn the lights back on? Is that possible?
Might take a little bit.
That's fine.
It's not that easy.
Figure with that presentation, we don't need to be sitting in the dark. It'll be easier to see hands if I can see you. So we'll take questions in a moment here for anybody on any of the topics, whether for the agency, for Bennington College, for the Attorney General's office. Rob McDougall from the Attorney General's office is here, who runs the Environmental Bureau, and we'll go from there. Sure.
One question I have is if Saint-Gobain is going to pay for the engineering study now, and the state put forth some money to do that, what's going to happen with the money that the state set aside for that?
So that remains to be seen. The money was put forward, and the appropriations was written in such a way so that it could be used for other things. It was written to be for the design or implementation of a remedy, so it could be used in another context. So we'll see. That money was always there as a contingency in case Saint-Gobain wasn't willing to pay for it, and we're happy that they have come forward and been willing to do that. So
Obviously, check with the legislative representatives. I'd like to see it continue to go towards solving our problem.
Understood.
And the next question would be for Bennington College. I'm wondering, I know that when they took samples inside the factory, they found other things besides PFOA, PFOSs, and different chemical chains, whatever letters you want to use. Did they test for any of that in the soil samples down further where the mechanicals tend to drop it into the soils up on Ball Mountain?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to go, but we do test for more than just PFOA and PFOS. I think that if there were high enough concentrations of some of the others, the butanoic and non-anoic, that we would have reported them. But I don't know offhand right now. But I mean, our philosophy is really to be as open with what we find as we have. In many of the samples, we've seen other PS, particularly the 9-chain and the 6 and the 7 and the 4 carbon chains. It's probably, halfway through the year that now the company that you're sending for analysis is reporting all of those. So that's something that I'll look into. If you give me your name, I'll be glad to get back to you on that. When I look at the
Sure, I just look at that as being able to give more confirmation to you.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's found at the factory and it's found down the
Right.
So in our investigation in the factory, we found almost every perfluorinated that we looked for, all the way up from 12-chain carbons down to 4-chain carbons of both the acids and the sulfonates. And we have seen various ones of them in soil samples dispersed in different areas all over Bennington. Some with more frequency than other. In the site investigation report, if you're really interested and you want to go in there, there's a spider diagram that shows you what frequency they found the different compounds at in the different sampling that was done. As you know, there were 150 or 200 soil samples taken from all over Bennington, and that's included in that report, as well as the ones inside the factory. One of the things is we don't see many of the longer chain, like the C10s and the C12s, further afield. And whether that's because they're at a much lower concentration or because they're just larger molecules so they don't travel as far, I would say at this point I don't know the answer to that question, but in general that's what we've observed in the work.
From a common sense point of view, that if the background studies show PFOA all over, which probably is going to happen, and then you're looking at the numbers, and if they're closer than you would like, but if something else that has been found at that factory is not generally all over the environment, that would be a clear marker for, supporting the case of aerosol air.
Sure. And again, concentration is very important. So we did find the highest levels of PFOA in the factory, lower levels of other things, but we did find them. So they were indeed there.
Stu?
When I saw the Bennington College study initially released, I was concerned because we found PFOA further up in the mountain ranges. Both North Bennington and Bennington rely on surface water sources. And I asked you this question this morning, I'd like to get clarified. We're tying all of these people into municipal sources. How is it that we find PFOA in the soils, but not in those surface waters?
Sure. So there's several answers to that question, Stu. One of them is you have two main water sources for Bennington. One is surface water, and one is spring. That spring has been evaluated. We also believe, as the presentation showed earlier, that that's very old water, maybe up to 1,000 years old, I've heard, coming down from Wallingford and way up in the Green Mountains, taking along.
It's actually coming from the south end of Mount Anthony.
Oh, it's coming from Mount Anthony? The stuff that's in Morgan Springs? Okay, well, it's coming from far afield. It's taken a long time to get there, right? So that's one answer. The other answer is for surface water. The majority of the water that's recharging that surface water is runoff from rains. And so it doesn't have time, it's not percolating down through the soil and having time to have the PFOA and other PFASs diffuse off the soils and into the water, or become soluble in the water and then migrate with the water into the surface water. And because the majority is runoff and hasn't had that contact time, it's just rainwater, and the rainwater, because there's not enough of it in the atmosphere anymore, it's not picking up that much of the PFAS, and that's why that water seems to be clean. Although I believe we've only sampled the combined water. I don't know if we've done the separation sample, so it would be maybe if Bennington College sampled that stream.
Yeah.
I don't know offhand. Yeah, we'd have to look into the specifics, but anyway, so we believe it's clean. It'll most likely stay clean. I did ask the question very pointedly: is the water for Bennington included in the agreement that we're trying to negotiate with Saint-Gobain? And at this point, my understanding is it wouldn't be if we come to some final agreement. So it would be separate. It would be outside the agreement and could be relitigated at another time if it turned up contaminated.
One question is, how often are you sampling water sources in municipal systems? How frequently are those being?
For they're sampled, under different frequency for different contaminants, but for PFOA, it's every 6 months, along with everything else.
So like the North Bennington and the Bennington water supply?
Correct, and we're doing that at point of use, not at source. So like we're just going to a tap and taking a tap sample for someone who's getting that water, but it's the water that you consume, so it's the same water.
It's not recommended to go to the source and check the sources?
Correct, we're not looking at the sources, we're looking at the point of use. So like currently the school is being sampled in North Bennington, and I think it's a house somewhere in Bennington that's getting sampled, I can't remember.
On Andre Lane?
On Andre Lane. So it's point of use.
Second question is, are the garden vegetables safe?
So the answer from the Agency of Agriculture is if you're irrigating with clean water, there's no reason to suspect that there's any issues with your vegetables. I understand there are some sampling of vegetation going on, and we'll look for the answers, but from all the research we've done and everything we got from the Agency of Agriculture, they believe that you can eat the vegetables out of your garden, and we believe it too.
Okay, so, but no one's sampling the vegetables to see what they contain?
No, we've sampled milk, maple syrup, and did we sample one vegetable? I can't remember.
I know that there is some research that Williams College has done where they sample, but we haven't seen those
They're
results.
trying. So mostly we're going on research done by Dr. Higgins from the University of Colorado and his peers. Because it's a lot to go to every site and sample vegetables, all types of vegetables. So they've done a lot of that, and that research that's been peer reviewed is what we've looked at and drawn information from.
For me, or let me know of a study that shows that the lettuce and the Swiss chard and all that in my soil that has 300 parts per billion, which is a lot.
Your soil doesn't have 300 parts per billion. Your soil doesn't have 300 parts per billion. It has like 6 or 8.
6 or 8.
Yeah, parts per billion. But having said that, I've gotten that information from my partner at the Agency of Agriculture and sent it out to other people. I'll just have to find that email and send it to you. I'm happy to do that.
There's a number of articles specifically about lettuce and strawberries. If the author's name is Chris Higgins, and we used them, we read them in our class at Bennington, and he goes through the how much PFOA accumulates in the roots and in the leaves and so forth. But it's very little, but it's soluble in water, so if it's taken up by plants, it's going to be there in some kinds of
Is it safe amount?
Huh?
Is it safe?
Do we know what's safe? I'm not sure.
We don't know.
Sir?
With with students concerned, this gentleman is concerned, it would seem that since Bowlesbrook, the source for Woodford Mountain and the Bennington water supply is so significantly different than Morgan Spring, why wouldn't you guys sample at those sources?
I think what we're hearing now is that maybe that's something we want to further investigate. So this is a good discussion that we're having.
Yeah, I mean, the point of use is the same water. It's just further down the stream. It's not like it's different water. So we know that if that water's clean, it's also clean at the source. But that's not saying that we couldn't necessarily go to the source and sample that also. I mean, it's hard to actually get in the well, so you have to take it from some tap somewhere, even if it's a tap at the treatment plant, which in North Bennington, that's where we went the first time, was to the treatment plant and took a sample. And it was clean, but it was a lot easier to take it from a tap in the village where we're already there. We don't have to coordinate with with people who are part-time or who are busy doing their job. So we figured it was the same water. Certainly happy to have the discussion to try and convince you that it is, but if we can't, we're certainly open to looking at other places.
Is there a timetable for the design?
So all of this has been, as we've talked about before, all of this is aimed to get to construction season in 2019, so that we can get the design done and get things out to bid for construction next year. We are talking that the likelihood is it's a multi-year project, just as the west side has been. So all of that lines up still, which is why we're happy now that we're moving towards design so that we can get there. So we're still on that timeline. Sir?
Would it be safe to say that apples would be less likely than strawberries?
I think what we are generally saying is we are not the expert to tell you which vegetable or fruit is less likely or more likely to take up PFOA.
Yeah, what we can say is from the evaluation of consumption, because it's a combination of the amount of the chemical, the toxicity of the chemical, and the amount that you actually consume. For the water, you drink 2 liters of water a day. We know that. That's pretty much a generally accepted amount. But when you eat an apple, how much water are you actually getting? Very little, and then that's been filtered by the tree and then into the apple, so it should be a lower concentration. So the amount is so low and so infrequent compared to drinking water that it's presumed to be safe based upon the research that's been done. We could go out and sample 100 different vegetables and fruits and come up with all kinds of different numbers. I don't know if anybody would feel any safer or less safer. And as Dr. Foley has indicated, there will probably be very low levels in every one of them at different amounts. And then it's just very difficult to quantify. But what we do know is it's a very small percentage compared to the amount that you drink from your tap every day.
What's the hold up on 67? Is it the drilling?
Okay.
About 67. About 67.
So, excuse me?
Is that the part of the project that you're talking about?
They're continuing with services at this point. They're going to be paving. So they've asked for a small extension and we've granted it.
Still working on the crossing?
The drilling, the crossing is still being worked on, that's correct. So the permits. So the question that was asked was whether the holdup on 67 was related to the river crossing, and part of the extension was granted for the change in the river crossing, for which the stream alteration permit was granted on September 24th, I believe.
But Jason, the stream crossing doesn't affect connections.
Stream crossing does not affect connections, that's correct.
Other questions, sir?
My name is Michael Fitzgerald, and mine is one of the homes that Richard referred to when he was talking about homes that are on the margin and will be receiving replacement wells. And I've been attending every one of these public meetings since the beginning of this process, and I was very concerned from the beginning that that I and the half a dozen or so other families that were in a similar situation would be lost and left behind in this understandable effort to get municipal water to the lion's share of people. And I'm very grateful for the fact that that has not been the case. And I wanted to come to tonight's public meeting to express that appreciation to the state agencies and to the employees of those agencies for how true to their words they have been throughout this process, and how much all of us in this situation appreciate that hard work and good faith. So thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you for saying that. Chuck and John and Richard and their team have been working on this tirelessly for multiple years now, and some of us are involved at different points, but it's really very happy to hear you say that you're appreciative of the work that they're doing, because they're in here every day trying to get this resolved. Any other questions? Jim?
Is there a possibility of a greater use of some of the re-drilling
on the east side?
We're too early to say as where that will be. So for the question for everybody, will there be further use of potential for drilling of new wells on the east side? And the answer is it's too early to know what the makeup will be. I think it's quite possible that we'll end up in similar situations where we're trying to get water lines to as many people as possible, but there are some where for many number of reasons it doesn't make sense, where we will try this series of events. And I'm glad to hear that we're having some progress and showing some good results on those test wells. Hopefully that will be a good solution for those homes. So, but too early to tell at this point. All right, well, thank you all very much for coming. Appreciate you coming out, and thanks to the middle school for hosting us tonight.